we're going to test eccentric hamstring strength using a Nordic drop on a Nord board. So what we're going to ask Mark to do is to slowly lower himself down to the ground as forcefully as he can by pulling up through the pads, and we're going to get a measure of eccentric strength left versus right. Okay, so we're going to allow yourself to fall forward to about here, Mark, and then fight, 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 good, and back up. And we'll go again. That's it, pull, 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 good, and relax. And last one, pull, 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 and relax. So here we can take his peak force from over across the 3 reps. I think this is a really interesting piece, Michael. It was actually a conversation with Giakoumis, who would know David Opar, you mentioned already quite well, is this technique of testing Nordics, is making sure that the athlete does not fight too early when they're in that real inner range. Because if we think about what's the optimum position for production of force, it could be somewhere in mid-range, so somewhere closer to that 30 degrees knee flexion. Whereas if I often find if we don't give athletes this cue, they'll fight too much in inner range and their scores will be down just simply because they're fighting really hard in a position where they won't produce peak force.
Yeah, I think it's a great cue for people out there listening then.
So here we're going to look at a test called the 90-20 test, and we're going to assess Mark's rate of force development in his hamstring using 4 stacks from Vald. So we're going to get Mark standing back against the wall. We're going to get Mark to position his left heel up on the plate. We're going to look for his hip in 90 degrees, and we're going to look for his knee in 20 degrees here. And Mark, hands across the chest, head back nice and flat. And what we're going to do is, in a second, we're going to ask Mark to pull as fast as we can into the plate. Our cueing here is really important for what we're trying to measure. So I'm going to count you down, Mark. In. When I count you down for 3, I'm going to get you to pull as fast as you can into that plate. So we're going to go in 3, 2, 1. Go, 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 and relax. Here, we're going to be looking at rate of force development of his hamstrings, and we can use different time points to figure out where he is from a rehab perspective. So here we're going to test hamstring capacity. As we know, fatigue is going to be related with injury risk. We can assess the endurance of the tissue locally by positioning Mark on his back with his knees about 20 degrees flexed, heels on a box. I'm going to get Mark to bring one leg up, the other one, Mark, to here. And what we're going to do is we're going to do bridges here to failure. We want Mark to go up on 1 second, down on another second. So what would be quite helpful in this situation to standardize the test is using a metronome of about 60 beats per minute. And failure for the test is going to be when he can't keep up with the time. Okay, you ready, Mark? So up, down, 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 and relax. And just some compensation that we might look for the athlete with this to just make sure he's not doing is swinging this leg up and down to try and get momentum. Try and encourage the athlete to stay fixed here.
And you've done a nice job of showing, like you said, starting off with what am I trying to test and picking the right test to be able to do that for. Where does isokinetic dynamometry, for those that have access towards it or want to utilize that, come into play in your opinion when we're looking at testing hamstrings and the qualities around that?
I suppose, look, IKD is always going to be the gold standard. If we actually have access to IKD in our clinic, but it's not something that we're going to get done with someone in a 30-minute appointment. So often we can throw someone on a Nord board and just get a measure of peak force and see where they are. But if we are really looking at isolating hamstring function, I do think IKD is the gold standard. We can see already from a paper we discussed by Ben MacDonald that just simply putting a force closure belt on someone changed the output on a Nordic drop. So sometimes Nordic drops can be spoken about as, can be thought of as the coordination between lumbar spine, glutes and hamstrings. Now I still think it is a very valid and reliable measure of hamstring strength, but in those recurrent cases or those high-grade cases or in that elite sport setting, I think the IKD is a very, very useful tool, because I think we can actually compare concentric versus eccentric function. And what we know from our strength and conditioning literature is we know that eccentrically we should be 30 to 40% stronger than we are concentrically. So we can get a measure where the athlete is from both his contractile elements in the tissue and those non-contractile elements, which will heavily influence eccentric loading in terms of where we really have to get after with our rehab.
Yeah, and I think this is something we've used a lot more as well recent times, is around IKD and similarly around looking at the quality of the curves. And I think you can get that a little bit from the Nordic or any isometric testing in terms of the difference in the slope of the curve versus left versus right. But I think with the IKD, you're able to get angle of peak torque. And I know Dave Opar, again, one of his other earlier studies was using that, and they saw changes to the angle of the ability to produce that, maximum amount of torque around the knee. And that was those that actually had a hamstring injury, had impairments, so they were able to produce maybe the same level of force, but in an earlier range versus an ability to do it in those outer ranges. So falls into that sort of long and strong sort of idea, and ability to handle that type of load or that tensile load in those long lengthened positions. And so I think IKD for us has had a significant impact, but like you said, sometimes there's time constraints, ability to get access towards it, lots of things that might impair. But like you said, if you've got one person who's got the resource to be able to do it and the time, then it can add that extra little bit of detail. And I suppose that is obviously utilising another additional test to be able to inform that. Where does cluster testing and the idea of that come into place when you're evaluating individuals?
I think it's really important, just like our physical assessment, to not pin our hopes on just one, or pin our reasoning process on just one result. I think it's really important to look at the bigger picture. I think it's really important to have a couple of tests that are suggestive of what this athlete needs, rather than I'm going to do one strength test and that's it. For instance, sometimes I find working in my own sport that athletes are apprehensive over doing a heavy Nordic maybe before they go on a pitch if it's part of a screening. Sometimes we actually just have to move it till after the pitch, but then I'm asking myself, are we getting the true picture that we want? Because they're obviously fatigued coming off the pitch. So I think if we look at just those eccentric scores, psychosocial factors might be influencing how much is that athlete pushing. So they might be a lot stronger than what they're showing us on that test. Whereas if we did ISO in 30 degrees, that often feels much safer to the athlete. And if we look at the two tests together, it gives us a bit more confidence in terms of what we're saying from a strength profiling perspective.